Welcome to Why I Vaccinate, presented by the Franny Strong Foundation and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. I'm Ann Thomas, and I am here with my co-host Veronica McNally. And Veronica, on the first segment of the show, we say hello to Dr. Joe Fakhoury. He is a pediatric hospitalist with Bronson Health. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And we want a COVID update right now. We want to find out from you, Dr. Fakhoury, what parents should know about the risks of COVID. So, talk a little bit about where we are with regard to COVID-19 and children.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So COVID-19 and children are, we're still concerned, obviously, that kids can easily pick up the virus and have some pretty significant side effects from the virus itself. We still are seeing what's called the multi-inflammatory syndrome in children, or MIS-C for short. And that's a typically post-COVID, pretty significant inflammatory syndrome that can cause a lot of inflammation in various parts of the body. We don't really know the risks of kids that can develop that after getting the COVID infection, but we do see it ranging from pretty mild to quite severe inflammation throughout the body. So we're still, trying to just be vigilant and careful with our interactions so that we can try and minimize the risks of kids getting sick.
And Dr. Joe Fakhoury, we do have parents out there that are concerned about the vaccine and having their children take the vaccine and the risks involved with the vaccine. So, can you address that?
Yeah. So I think it's important to review sort of what the vaccine is in particular. It has been studied for many, many, many years. It's just the first vaccine that we were able to successfully create using this particular technology. And the way that this vaccine works is different from other what we call live vaccines, for example. So live vaccines, which is like the measles vaccine, can cause your body to have an immune response that's similar to a natural infection. This particular mRNA component vaccine simply just gives the body instructions, or a recipe, if you will, to produce one particular part of the virus, which in this case is the spike protein. These are common phrases that we keep hearing. Once your body generates that immune response and kind of has that recipe, that mRNA is actually broken down. It does not stay in the body. It doesn't enter the cell like the hub. And so typically your body is just able to then take those instructions and create the response that it needs to when you get infected with the virus.
And what about some side effects that we have heard with regard to the vaccine, especially the cardio side effects?
Yeah. So I'll start by the most common side effects, which most people have experienced for those who have taken the vaccine, and that is sore arm, redness at the site, maybe some fatigue, some fevers, chills, and some body aches. But yes, there has been a lot of conversation about what we call myocarditis and pericarditis. And so those are inflammation of different aspects of the heart muscle. And that has been reported in really adolescents and young adults under the age of 30, typically following the second dose in a series. However, I'd like to point out that the risk of myocarditis in that particular population is much higher, up to 34 times higher after the COVID infection than it is after the COVID vaccination. It's also important to point out that the post-vaccine myocarditis, or the inflammation of the heart, that might require hospitalization in children or teens, is much shorter, typically 1 to 2 days, and more mild than if you were to get it after the virus. And that average hospital stay is typically about 5 days and could be more severe.
Now, Veronica, I know you've got some questions for Dr. Fakhoury too.
I do. Dr. Fakhoury, tell us about the Delta variant. Is the Delta variant more serious? Is it causing more infection in kids than its predecessor variants?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tough question to answer for a couple of reasons. So viruses naturally often mutate, as you guys know, especially the longer that they are around in a population. And I think, one of the challenging aspects that we have with the Delta variant is that we're suspecting that we're seeing a lot more people get infected and sick from the variant specifically. We don't know entirely that all of these more infectious cases are the Delta variant if they're not being specifically tested for. But that is the suspicion, and it does appear to be causing more of a reaction in kids, similar to other viruses that we have seen, but it does seem to be pretty contagious compared to some of the other more typical viruses, if you will.
And the Pfizer vaccine is currently authorized for use in the children who are 12 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us about the new potential recommendation for kids? What do we know about a COVID vaccine for kids?
Yeah, so as you alluded to, right now, young adults above 18 obviously have the option to have vaccinations from all of the available options. Right now, kids, as you said, 12 to 18, have the ability to be vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine in particular. They just recently have filed for emergency use authorization for the age group of 5 to 11. And as we know, as it stands right now, as of today, October 15th, on October 26th, the CDC is going to, the FDA is going to meet and sort of review the data from Pfizer. And then from what we know, on November 2nd, currently scheduled, is when the CDC and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is going to be meeting to provide the recommendation, which we anticipate to be that children ages 5 to 11 can then be vaccinated. In addition, I do know that Pfizer remains in the testing process for kids down to age 6 months. However, right now we don't really have a strong timeline on when kids from age 6 months to 5 years will be eligible for the vaccine.
So as a doctor who cares for children, what kind of evidence are you wanting to see to demonstrate safety and efficacy in this age group?
So, I think it's really important to note that all vaccines undergo such rigorous testing, rigorous studying. We're very careful in the scientific community to make sure that what we are going to be recommending and providing for anybody of any age is safe. And I think we live in an age right now where all we kind of do hear about and talk about is COVID, which can sometimes seem daunting. But in reality, I do think that this particular vaccine has had such intense monitoring that the duration of the studies and that the amount of people who have already received the vaccine and the follow-up that has happened from those who have received the vaccine has really proven that this is a very safe and effective vaccine to prevent very significant and severe infection. And so I think that, focusing on, at the end of the day, the pediatricians in general have been folks that families have turned to for so many things. Families have turned to us for advice on how to get their kid to sleep at night and how to help that little runny, stuffy nose in the middle of the night. And our input has always been trusted and appreciated by families. And so I think that, right now we continue to stand firm in what we believe with the evidence and the science that we see. And we just ask families to continue to trust us for the care for their children, because we always do have their best interests at heart.
Now, you're really active with the Michigan chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I want parents to understand what the AAP does and what its role is in this particular process for the COVID vaccine. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the AAP, or the American Academy of Pediatrics, has always been a very strong advocate for both pediatricians as well as children and adolescents. And the AAP, from a national organization standpoint, has been very proactive at encouraging the studies and the review of data in children, because a lot of the initial focus was in vaccinating older adults and middle-aged adults. And down to state chapters, this organization has, always kept the interests of both the children in the state as well as the pediatricians who practice in Michigan at the forefront. And that is more so meant, how do we support families to have access to equitable healthcare in general, but then more importantly, how do we make sure that they have access to things like the COVID vaccine, because this is a little bit of a newer rollout, if you will, especially now as we expect that younger kids can soon be able to get it.
Dr. Fakhoury, what are you seeing with regard to infants and COVID? Are they somewhat protected when they're really, really young? What is the latest research on that?
Yeah, so personally, I've seen a variety of infections related to COVID in infants, and then just kind of seeing what the data seems nationally. It does seem to vary. It seems to vary from pretty mild, that doesn't necessarily require any hospitalization, to fairly severe, that might require some hospitalization for some oxygen needs or some other support. Sometimes kids just have a lot of time trouble eating when they get infected with COVID, and so sometimes they require the hospital just for that alone. When you compare it to other more commonly known viruses like the flu and RSV, which are two other ones that we hear a lot about, it can kind of range in terms of severity.
Sure. How do we keep them safe until the vaccine comes out for those little ones?
I think it's really important to just remember that if your child is sick, or if someone in your family is sick, minimizing interaction with other folks is very important. And that's just, common courtesy that really was kind of recommended before COVID. And then if you do have a young kid, I think keeping in mind the risks of asymptomatic spread is definitely something to consider. And so even though people might not show symptoms, it's important to maybe consider not having your kid, your younger child, visiting with other people at this stage of the game, unless those visits are definitely very important for the family's particular situation. But routine hand washing is very important. And so even parents taking care of their young kids, it's difficult to always keep up with regular hand washing in between tasks. But I think that's another great way to minimize the spread, especially from a parent to a child.
Dr. Joe Fakhoury, pediatric hospitalist with Bronson Health, thank you so much for this great advice. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You are listening to Why I Vaccinate. We'll be back right after these messages.